Hi, I'm Sam and I'm a Senior Policy and Campaigns Officer at Epilepsy Action. Now for the last year or so I've been working on cannabis-based medicines and I've been privileged enough to lead on a lot of the work Epilepsy Action have done on this issue. So Epilepsy Action is a national charity and we exist to improve the lives of people with epilepsy. So part of this is obviously ensuring that people with epilepsy can access the best treatments at the best times to ensure they can live the best quality of life possible. As I'm sure you've seen, cannabis-based medicines have really been out of the news in the last 12 months. In November 2018, the government changed the law to allow specialist doctors to prescribe cannabis-based medicines. Now, along with that change in the law, they asked a number of professional organisations, groups of doctors, to produce guidelines for specific conditions to basically set out what, when and how cannabis-based medicine should be prescribed. Now, for children with epilepsy, these guidelines were produced by the British Paediatric Neurology Association, or the BPNA for short. And then for adults, these were followed up with guidelines produced by the Association of British Neurologists, also known as the ABN. Now, these guidelines and the change in the law represent a really important step forward in people being able to access these medicines in a safe and timely manner, which Epilepsy Action thinks is two really important features of this. Now, unfortunately, Epilepsy Action believes that the guidelines are too restrictive. Now, what we've seen since the change in the law is that people with epilepsy who could benefit from these medicines, many of them are still unable to access them. And obviously it's disappointing for us, but for a number of families and patients who could benefit, it's very difficult, and we understand that, especially when these epilepsies are severe and treatment resistant. This group of patients faces much higher risks than other people with epilepsy. Now, these risks include SUDEP, sudden unexplained death in epilepsy. There's other mortality risks around prolonged seizures. You know, seizures can be daily, very long, multiple seizures in one time. It's a very incredibly harrowing, very difficult condition to live with. Quality of life sometimes can be very good. It's very difficult for all people involved. So obviously new treatments for these patients give them hope, much needed hope often. It's really important to remember that cannabis-based medicines for epilepsy, they're not a silver bullet. Now, they're unlikely to work for everyone. They're unlikely to be suitable for everyone. And they're not a cure for epilepsy. It's really, really important to remember. Whilst there is some compelling evidence, clinical and anecdotal evidence that these can help some people with epilepsy, they're not going to work for everyone. So when we're talking about cannabis-based medicines for epilepsy, we're talking about two main types of treatments. Now, the first type contains what they call CBD, which is a compound found in the cannabis plant. Now, CBD is non-psychoactive, so it's not associated with the feeling of getting high, as is known with recreational cannabis use. It's also known by the brand name Epidiolex that you might have seen. So for CBD-based treatments, Epidiolex, there is some really good quality clinical evidence of the safety and effectiveness of this treatment in children predominantly with two epilepsy syndromes. So one is Dravet syndrome and the other is Lennox-Gastaut syndrome. There's also a growing body of evidence, again, of its safety and effectiveness in other syndromes, and that research is coming through, so we'll keep an eye on that. Now, secondly, when we talk about cannabis-based medicines for epilepsy, we talk about medicines that contain THC and CBD. CBD, as we discussed before, but also THC. Now, THC is a bit more controversial for some people. THC is a psychoactive compound. It's found in a cannabis plant, and it's also associated with giving recreational users a feeling of being high. Obviously, there's also some concerns around the impact of THC, especially on developing brains, and as epilepsy is a neurological condition, it's a really important area. Now, there isn't as good quality clinical evidence for drugs containing THC and CBD to treat epilepsy. Now, a really big important thing is there needs to be more good quality clinical research done into drugs containing THC and CBD for epilepsy. It's really important that we build up a good quality evidence base so we can see if these drugs are safe and if these drugs are effective for treating people with epilepsy. That's really important. Now, Epilepsy Action have been pushing the government, and we're pleased to see that they've recently put out a call for research into cannabis-based treatments for epilepsy, so we're optimistic there. And we've also been encouraging pharmaceutical companies to do similar research. But in the meantime, it's not to say that there isn't any evidence that these drugs can be safe and effective to treat people with epilepsy. Now, particularly we're talking about here anecdotal evidence, and this has largely come from 2 young boys in the UK who have been accessing and using cannabis-based medicines containing THC and CBD. Now, you might have seen these 2 boys and their incredible families in the news over the last 12 months. The names are Billy Caldwell and Alfie Dingley. Now, what we've seen from Billy and Alfie is their conditions seem to have improved quite dramatically while they've been using medicines containing THC and CBD. We've seen reduced seizures and improved quality of life. And this has been noted by doctors as well, by the doctors and by the families. So it's very important we get this good quality clinical research to complement and support the anecdotal evidence we've seen already. Coming back to the guidelines produced by the BPNA and the ABN, we think they're too restrictive. A number of parents and patients think they're too restrictive as well. Now, the reason they think this is because some people with epilepsy who think they could benefit have tried to access cannabis-based medicines through the NHS and they've been unsuccessful. In some instances, doctors have referred to the guidelines and said that they're not able to prescribe in this instance. In other cases, doctors can be sceptical about the safety or effectiveness of these medicines, and that's completely understandable. You know, these are new treatments, and as we said before, especially around drugs containing CBD and THC, there isn't good quality clinical evidence there, and that's what doctors work on, and it's really important people are aware of that. They do it for the best interest of patients. But we share these frustrations of many people who we think could benefit, particularly, as I said, those with severe and treatment-resistant epilepsies. Now, Billy and Alfie have been able to access these drugs containing CBD and THC after a lot of fighting and campaigning tirelessly to access them. Now, we want the same to be true of other families and other patients who could benefit. We want them to be able to access these drugs in a safe and timely manner. But unfortunately, as we're hearing, that isn't always the case. So it's important to talk really about what Epilepsy Action are doing about that. So we've been engaging with all the relevant organisations, so everyone from the government to the NHS, to the professional organisations, including the BPNA. We've been raising our concerns of patients, and we've been pushing to ensure that people who could benefit from cannabis-based medicines are able to access them in a safe and timely manner. Now, as we've seen, for very few people, this has been the case, but for the majority, it hasn't. We want to ensure that people who could benefit can access these treatments. Now, we've been engaging on all fronts. We've been working with NICE, who are producing the guidelines, clinical guidelines published in October, and these will supersede the current short-term guidelines we discussed earlier. We've been working with the Health and Social Care Select Committee in Parliament. We've responded to their inquiry on this issue. We've been in conversations with the BPNA and others, as I said before, to raise our concerns about this. But we'll keep pushing and we'll keep working, especially working with patients, working with the media, working with other organisations and other charities to raise shared concerns and to ensure that people who could benefit can access is what's so important. But it, again, it has to be safe and it has to be timely, because that's where it hasn't been so far. It hasn't been timely at all. We've also drafted what we think could be the start of a protocol to set out how, when and where cannabis-based medicine should be available for people with epilepsy. Now, first and foremost, we think people with severe and treatment-resistant epilepsies who have been unable to achieve adequate seizure control with existing licensed treatments should be able to access Epidiolex in the first instance, that's a CBD-based treatment. Now, if for whatever reason Epidiolex is not successful in reducing seizures or improving quality of life, if there is some evidence, be that anecdotal evidence or otherwise, that cannabis-based medicine containing THC and CBD could be beneficial, could improve these people's epilepsies, then we think they should be able to access them. But it's important that this is done within safe, controlled environments. So this includes a very frank discussion about the evidence base or lack of evidence base for using these drugs. We think also that there should be a number of criteria that people with epilepsy should meet in order to be considered for accessing cannabis-based medicines, and this could include things like seizure frequency, types of epilepsy, comorbidities and previous treatment history. But in these cases, when these things have been considered and when there are adequate stopping procedures in place, so a clear plan on when these treatments should be stopped, if there are adverse effects, side effects, or if they're not working. Now, within these clearly defined confines and with the support of expert doctors, we think people should be able to access these medicines, and we think that this protocol could be the start of that happening in a better way than it's happening at the moment. Now, Epilepsy Action will keep doing what we've been doing, and we're sure that the incredible campaigners and families and patients who have also been pushing for access will continue to do what they're doing, and have done an incredible job so far, and we're sure that they will carry on doing an incredible job going forward. And can't imagine how difficult this must be for some of those families at the moment, and as I said, their tireless campaigning really does keep us campaigning as well. If there's any advice and information that you might want from Epilepsy Action, we've got a free phone helpline that you can contact. It's on 0808 800 50 50. That's 0808 800 50 50, and that's if you want any advice and information around anything to do with epilepsy, including cannabis-based medicines. Please do get in touch. And yeah, thanks for listening.